All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Do me a favor, mash that subscribe button, comment on the video, upvote the video, and I'll let you know today is a special treat. We have Scott Bentley from Locked On Tigers because everybody, as you know, I did a video explaining how I was all in with the Detroit Tigers and how I got there following Ole Miss's national championship. Well, now I'm getting my indoctrination into all things Tigers, and Scott Bentley from Locked On Tigers is the perfect person to do that. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing great, man. I'm happy to be here. I love the story arc to get here, and yeah, I can't wait to talk some ball.
Yeah, it's really fun. And like I said in the earlier video, and like I told you earlier, the one thing I didn't want to do this was glory hunt. So the Astros out, the Yankees
Certainly
out.
didn't.
Yeah, I was a Saints fan in the '80s. I can handle this.
Right.
So I wanted an interesting. And before we get started, Tiger Stadium, one of the best ballparks that has ever existed. And it's just a shame. I'll be familiar with Comerica. I'll get to like it, but seeing Cecil Fielder hit the ball over the roof, and that Tiger Stadium will always have a soft spot in my heart just for that, even before I made this decision. And now it probably has even more of one.
Yeah, 100%. Tiger Stadium will forever be, will ever be ingrained into this city's history, honestly. And they still have, stuff set up around like Tiger Stadium, where Tiger Stadium was, and all that. And it's very cool. They still pay a lot of like respect and whatnot to it around Comerica Park as well. But it definitely one of a kind for sure.
So when I went all in with the Detroit Tigers, I went all in on this blind. Other than the fact that I know that I'm going all in on a team that won like in the mid 60s games last year, that I'm aware of. But what is the indoctrination things that I need to know? If I'm going to be Joe Tiger all in, what do I need to know?
Well, you definitely need to know where the team stands currently. So I'm glad that you kind of have that under your belt and out of the way. The Tigers were a powerhouse in the early 2010s, right? Like they won 4 straight division titles. They were the dominant and premier team in the AL Central from 2011 to 2014. That they won the division title every single year, and every single year from 11 to 13 made it to at least the ALCS, and then 2012 they made the World Series and lost. So they were a premier team and are widely considered to be one of the better teams of the last 20, 30 years to not win a World Series. Like that 2012 and 13 era, those 2 seasons specifically, you're talking about, in my opinion, the 2013 team, there's not a single general manager in baseball that wouldn't have traded their entire roster for our entire roster. It's just David Ortiz did David Ortiz things, and we found ourselves on the losing end of it. But so that's the biggest thing I would say is that you are where the team stands currently is 20. Well, they made the World Series in '06 too, and we're pretty good in there. So like from 2006 to 14, you're talking about a really good baseball team that's consistently playing meaningful games. 2015 and 16, it slowly starts declining. 2016, they barely missed the playoffs. They just absolutely blow it up in 2017. They trade everyone away. The deadline in 2017 and the offseason of 2017, they trade away Verlander. They trade away JD Martinez. They trade away everybody. Ian Kinsler leaves. Everybody that's part of that great era, they trade away. And they've been in a rebuild literally ever since. We're going on, depending on who you ask, you're 5, 6, 7. You know, the more pessimistic fans say it's year 7. The more optimistic say it's year 5. But 2017 is when they entered the rebuild, and we're still here. We have not even gone 500 since the rebuild started. And last year was a massive disappointment. If you're talking about 2021 was a huge step forward. They bring in AJ Hinch, obviously his first job since the cheating scandal stuff. They take a risk on him and bring Hinch in. And he makes a ton of changes, leads the team to a record in the high 70s. I think they won 77 games, somewhere around there in 2021. And everybody was like, oh, wow, we're almost 500. We're taking huge steps in the right direction. We have like some of the best prospects in all of baseball in the minors. 2022 is going to be this huge year. And then every single thing that could have possibly gone wrong for a baseball team in the year 2022 happened to the Detroit Tigers. Injuries, people that weren't hurt had the worst years of their careers, etc. And now this year is just a big question mark. They fired their GM. That's been the GM throughout the entire rebuild from 2017 until last year. So this is the first full season of a new man in charge, new president of baseball operations, and hopefully that means a new thing. So really, if you're talking where this team stands currently, brand new regime at the top, and a team that is desperately trying to figure out which was the fluke, 2021 or 2022.
One thing that was pretty interesting when I was going to see games this spring is that a lot of these players that were making moves, like Spencer Torkelson, they talked about, after I listened to your show, I found out there was a lot of stuff that he had to work through, and last year was not his best year. But in spring practice, the first thing that popped off to me was him. He just jumped. The ball just exploded off of his bat. So I put a check away on that one. Riley Green popped to me. The pitching staff I do not know much about, honestly. But coming into this blind is kind of an interesting perspective that I've had on this, because you don't have any of these preconceived biases in the spring training. You're going in there with a blank slate. I didn't know, Jonathan Scope from the third baseman, Ibanez. I couldn't told you one thing about him. And sitting there watching, you literally just judge off of the performance that you're seeing. That's the starting point. You have nothing preconceived to go off of. So like Torkelson and Green and I think it was Turnbull pitching the ball, and with a reliever. I can't remember his name. Just
Alex Lang is one that it might be. Alex Lang is one of the nastiest pitchers you'll ever see. He's a reliever, but
yeah, there's one of them just had an absolutely explosive slider, and maybe it was Wingard. I can't remember.
Winginter. Yeah, he's new to all of us, actually. Yeah, he wasn't on the team last year. He was an off-season pickup, so he's just as new to me as he is to you.
Yeah, but we were sitting in the stands watching the game and everything, and I just see somebody in a Tigers jersey, and it's like, hey, is that somebody I should pay attention to? Because is that somebody for real? And they just it's like, oh, he's just coming back from Tommy John or something like that. And it's like, okay. And it was a really cool perspective, because those preconceived biases, especially in modern sports, I call it the Tua syndrome. And that is, Tua struggled his first year. They're going to take that take from now until he retires that Tua is not a good quarterback, and it doesn't matter what he does. But I think those biases, not having them, help me out.
I completely agree with you. And the really interesting part about you hopping in right now is that there was so much turnover this offseason. Again, we have a brand new guy in charge that pretty much made it very clear that he abundantly disagreed with nearly everything the previous GM did. And the previous GM is going to go down as one of the most disliked figures in the history of Detroit sports. And he not a lot of success, not a lot went right. Al Avila, the former GM, not a name you don't even say in public, really. And so the new guy, Scott Harris, he comes in, and immediately the first thing he does is get rid of 15 to 17 players on the 40-man roster. So you're a ton of turnover, almost half of the 40-man roster he got rid of. And that was one of the first things he did. So there's a lot of turnover happening, not as much at the top of the roster, the names you mentioned there. Everybody knows Torkelson and Green are going to be presumably a part of this long-term plan. And Javi Baez is going to be here, whether people like it or not. But the bottom part of that roster is just going to be churning over and over and over for most of this season. And it's that's not exactly the sign of a great baseball team, but it does also mean that a lot of changes, quick to get a new guy in if somebody is struggling or whatnot. It's exciting to me, honestly, at the same time.
You know, I give you a lot of credit because I've listened to your show every morning. Your player cards that you do in your third segment, fantastic. I'm not as analytically sound as you are, but it's really interesting when you start talking about ground balls and walk rates and stuff like that. And I'm going to be interested following Major League Baseball because this is 30 years later. This is a different baseball than I walked away
Completely.
from. Yeah, I mean, other than the shift being gone, which I would have not have come back if the shift was still around. Uh, but now that it's gone, and the spring training games were taking like 2.5 hours to play.
Yeah.
It was the viewer experience in person was amazing, and all of that. I'm just really pretty excited about all of this and embarking on this journey.
Well, I'm pumped. Like,
Yeah.
anytime it's funny. I was just like checking, Twitter DMs one day, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, somebody that like the fact that I get to kind of be the bridge to like help you uh get acclimated with this team and whatnot is super cool. That's this type of conversation is one of my favorites to have, just because this is been, Tigers baseball has pretty much been my religion since birth. So like just being able to talk about it and everything in more of a general sense, and kind of get out of the day-to-day like super analytical performance based every single day type of thing is a fun conversation for me too. So
Well, let's get in the weeds. I think his name is Cesar Hernandez.
yes.
He just volunteered out of his contract,
Mhm.
declined the option to the minor leagues, so that opens up a potential, not necessarily a roster spot, but a place in the pecking order. Unless he was out of it, who do you think is going to take his spot, kind of in the Tigers organization?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because he will go down as not having played a single game for the Detroit Tigers, right? Like he wasn't on the team last year. They picked him up in the offseason. It was a minor league deal with an invite to spring training. And then if he didn't make the roster, he could become a free agent. And that's obviously what he did. Um, I kind of talked about this on yesterday's show, I guess, but it's this team really, really likes versatility, like a lot. This is an organization from the top, Scott Harris, the guy in charge, all the way to like coaching, like AJ Hinch and whatnot. Everybody that has a voice in this organization loves versatility. And I think one of the things with Cesar Hernandez, even though he looked pretty solid in the spring, was that he can play one, maybe two positions. Like he definitely can play second base, but they tried him at third and he didn't necessarily look fantastic. And that's kind of it. And so I think that they're looking for, especially if it's going to be a veteran that takes away at bats from a younger player. I think that they would want that player to be more solidified with and look comfortable in more positions. And I just don't think Hernandez really did that at the end of the day, even though I thought he was going to make the roster. So I would say, like Andy Ibanez, a name you mentioned earlier, he's not going to be on the opening day roster, but I'm assuming he stays with the organization, he'll be in that convo. And then names like Zach Short as well, another guy, super utility, played all over the place in the spring, has been here for 3 years already now, but kind of just up and down, minors, majors, his entire tenure here. And I would imagine that assuming he stays with the organization as well, he might have to clear waivers. So we'll see. But it's just the biggest point that Scott Harris said going into the season was they wanted to earmark at bats and innings pitched for young players. Like he is kind of similar to you in the sense of like he doesn't, he has no prior like conceptions of a lot of these players. Like he was with the Giants 12 months ago. He was with the Giants 8 months ago. So he is coming in and he's basically said he didn't make too many moves in the offseason because he said, we're just going to play all of the young kids and I'm going to determine how good I think they are. And then we're going to make a ton of moves after that. So I think that for him specifically, it's probably just going to be like I said, the bottom of the roster is going to constantly be turning, and it's probably going to be a handful of youth, I would imagine.
Couple more questions. With the Major League Draft coming up here, I think the Tigers pick third.
Yep.
Or in there. Do you think Jacob Gonzalez will be in that position from Ole Miss?
Maybe. I really like Jacob Gonzalez. I'm not going to lie to you. I think there's also a conversation, the big debate right now, and we still have a lot of the high school and college season to play, obviously, but I do think that they're like Max Clark is like the best high school hitter in the draft. And that's like the big debate right now that everybody loves to talk about with the Tigers draft is at number 3 overall. Do you take the risk on high school players? Because high school players are always inherently risky. You know, the Tigers did it a couple of years ago. That's a different conversation. But because they you don't really know. They have really high ceilings, but they also have really low floors. And so that's like the hot debate right now is like, is Clark is he the pick at 3, or are they going to go with a more presumably sure thing in a college bat, maybe like Gonzalez or like Cruz isn't going to fall, but somebody for an SEC hitter probably would be in that conversation, I'd imagine, if it's not Clark.
Yeah, and Jackson Jobe, I'm assuming you're talking about
Yes.
there. He was actually an Ole Miss signee.
Yep.
From back in the day. Remembered him well, followed him all the way through the draft. Didn't know that I would care about the Tigers at that point, but there we go. But maybe that leads me into another question. Him and Casey Mize have similar injuries. Are pitchers overthrowing the ball?
It's the age-old question, really. Velocity is comfortably the highest it's ever been in the history of baseball, and it's not even particularly close. So you have that conversation of like, oh, is the increase in velocity leading to the increase in arm injuries? And like, yes, it's hard to say not, but I also, it's complicated. It's really complicated because like you have someone like Justin Verlander who pitched, and he's a freak of nature. I'm not trying to compare anybody to Justin Verlander, but he, the first 15, 14 years of his career was like almost entirely injury free. And then the newer pitchers, that's why people didn't like the Jobe pick, because you're taking a high school arm at number 3 overall. High school arms get hurt all the time. You don't know how good they're going to end up being. And sure enough, now we're here where he's still in like single A ball and he's already got an injury and whatnot. He's still super young. And I don't want this to turn into like I don't think Jackson Jobe's going to be good thing, because plenty of people say that already. And I do think that he has the ability to become a darn good pitcher, but that is why, like, that's why people were upset, was because of what's happening right now. And Mize is kind of his own thing too. He's always had injury stuff, and even dating back to Auburn, and he was just the consensus 1-1, so people didn't care, and now we're kind of seeing the fruits of that labor too. So we'll see, but that's why people don't like rebuilds based around pitching, because pitchers get hurt all the time. There's like an old adage where if you have 4 starting pitching prospects, one of them is going to have a healthy career. That's like a legitimate, like back in the early 2000s, like a scout saying was like, oh yeah, 1 of 4 will be healthy. And so that's not, like scientific or anything, but like, that's why when this whole rebuild the Tigers find themselves in was based at the beginning around, we're just going to have insane starting pitching and it's going to carry us to the promised land. And, now currently Matt Manning is the only starter that's like healthy, but he was hurt last year. Like pitchers just get hurt all the time. So I don't know if it's overthrowing the ball or what, but it's definitely something that when you're roster building, you have to take into account that you're not going to have only 5 dudes start games for you all year.
Yeah, it's gotten the point. Like my era, you would have Nolan Ryan throw 225 pitches in a game and come off of 3 days rest.
Right.
It's just a different era. So I'm really interested to see what baseball is going to be this time around. Anyway, thank you so much, Scott, for stopping by today and helping me out with my Tiger journey. Hopefully, will you do this again for me during the season?
Of course. Yeah. Whenever, man.
All right, man. Thanks again for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. Make sure you check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball in one place. Plus, you get to hear from big name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. It's Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Scott Bentley, Locked On Tigers. If you like analytics, and even if you're not a Tigers fan, whenever your team plays them, because everybody's playing everybody this year, listen to Locked On Tigers, because that breakdown will be pretty terrific. Anyway, Scott, thank you very much for stopping by, and I'll talk to you later, man.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
All right.